From Unity Church of San Antonio, a spiritual community practicing how to be the light of the world, we bring you this message to remind you of your true nature, which is divine. Here now is Reverend Linda Martella Whitsett.
Oh, just so beautiful. Okay, it's all about perception today. You noticed, right? I'd like to share something that really sets us up for today from the faith section of today's Express News. I was looking for a way to enter into this topic because today's subject, and actually the subject of the next couple of Sundays, is faith for these times. I think we need a little faith for these times. So I wanted to set up, what is the constitution of these times? I probably don't need to say too much about that, but I was having trouble just putting it together for myself because I don't want to go there, really. So I was very grateful for this Reverend David Gushee in the paper today. He's Distinguished University Professor of Christian Ethics and Director of the Center for Theology and Public Life at Mercer University. So he put into words some things that I think will give us just the tenor of where we want to go for today. Why we need faith for these times. He says there's several hard truths that we've learned about America this year. First of all, America is more divided than ever. He suggests we're at least two different countries, really. There's and you know, you probably have friends who stand on one side of that country or another. Here in this community, we're very diverse, and so there are some people here who would consider themselves socially liberal but fiscally conservative, and there's all different aspects of that, where we stand politically. So he describes it as these two sides: a conservative, largely white, somewhat older, largely Christian country with a center of gravity in the South and the Midwest, and a progressive, multiracial, younger, increasingly secular, and multi-faith country with a center of gravity on the coasts and in our big cities. And these countries do not understand each other. That's his point. He says also this: American economic anxiety is profound. We're standing here with a lot of the haves and the have-nots, and what we notice and what we certainly read about in the news is a greater chasm between haves and have-nots in our country, and it's leading to a need for a correction. He also says, and this is the most discouraging thing, is that American racism is alive and well. No surprise here, correct? No surprise, which is why we need a memorial for the Orlando attacks. And then he says this, that the moral vision of America's conservative religious leadership clashes with big business today. So what we're seeing is, interestingly, because big business was always associated with that very staunch, very conservative, very Christian right sort of leanings, but big business, a lot of big business today is becoming more interested in diversity. And of course, their purses, the purse of big business, depends upon a diverse populace, doesn't it? So they're just seeing that there's clashes happening now between the economic structures and the religious structures in our society, and there's rising up that's happening. So this is the way change happens anyway, is through a mass shift in consciousness. So, I mean, none of these things are surprising to us, but none of them really have us sleep comfortably at night, perhaps, you know? Maybe you're feeling it. This is what happened to me, and why this topic? Because in recent weeks, I have found myself unusually agitated, unexpectedly negative, surprisingly to me, doubtful and suspicious-minded. I mean, not to any great extent, but I'm aware of the subtleties of that. I'm aware of unrest inside of me. But I was misperceiving it. I was thinking it had something to do with me. Something's not right with me. Isn't that where we go? It must be something wrong with me. Which is why I needed that opening song today myself, right? See My Beauty. But all of a sudden, I snapped out of it with this realization in meditation that, oh, I'm just feeling the collective consciousness. I'm just feeling the mass amounts of fear and anger and, name the emotion. I'm just feeling the unrest of not just America, because look what happened in Britain. I'm just tuning into something larger than my own personal circumstance. And I want to ask you, if you've been feeling some of that stuff, if you've been feeling some particular unrest, are you willing to shift your perception and stop making it about you and something wrong with you or your life? Are you willing to start seeing it in a bigger, in a broader, more expansive way? And when we're willing to do that, we then begin to create spaciousness around our own struggle. And this, I believe, is what the faith for these times is all about. The ability to shift our perspective is one of the aspects of spiritual faith. Perception. Charles Fillmore, co-founder of Unity, called faith the perceiving power of the mind, linked with the power to shape substance, which means it's not enough to just shift your awareness. Now you got to do something about it, right? And in the next couple of weeks, we're going to look at the aspects of today. I really want to look at perception as a dominant theme, because we have some challenges with perception. Well, here's what perception is. It's our awareness, or it's our consciousness. It's how we interpret the information that's coming to us. That's what our perception is. We might see something, but are we really observing it? And when we observe it, are we making up something about it based upon our own past experience, our own familiarity with it, or whatever? Or are we able to see and shift, have a kind of a perspective that, that allows for a fresh understanding? This is really what's possible with spiritual faith. And that's where I want to go today. We have some real challenges with perception. And one of them is this, is that we assume, oftentimes we assume that what we see is true. Don't we? I want to ask Allie if you would put up that first slide here. There's two images on here. One might be a familiar face, Jesse Jackson, and this other woman who seems to be crouched down. Both of them are crying. When you look at those pictures, what's the first thought you have? Sadness? Grief? You feel compassion for them. Yeah, because they're crying, darn it. They're crying. So what we perceive when we see, very often all you have to do is look at somebody who's crying, and what happens to you? The tears start flowing, right? Because we are tied in compassion with one another. But the question is, what are we seeing? What's happening? And without some context, we can't know, can we? It sure looks like sadness, doesn't it? But let me tell you about that picture up here. This is a picture of Colombia's Yuri Alvear celebrating after winning her judo match in the 2012 Olympics. She won the bronze in the women's 70-kilogram division, and she was ecstatic. And that's not what you think you're seeing when you look at just a picture, right? But this tells us something, because when we look at it, we think we know a truth. It sure can look just as much like anguish as anything else, can it? And yet for her, these were tears of sheer joy and celebration. So Jesse Jackson, we've seen Jesse cry in all manner of human events, all the way from the days of civil rights. This is actually a picture of him in the crowd at the moment President Obama was elected. Tears of joy. You wouldn't know unless you were there, unless you had some context, right? This is precisely why it's important for us to sharpen our skills of perception and to know when we're looking at something, whether we're seeing the whole picture. Because 9 times out of 10, we're not seeing the whole picture. Is there some relevance of that for you? If you've been on social media this morning, you know there's some relevance in that for you, right? All right, another thing, the other problem we have with perception is that we can miss what is there in the picture to be seen. We can fail to see what is there. So I want to bring up the next picture. Boy, I wish I could make that a little bit bigger. What do you see? See a skyline, a bridge, sky. See buildings. See buildings. How many of you, Giles Whitsett, stop that. How many of you saw the table and chairs sitting on top of the bridge? Okay, tell the truth. Tell the truth. All right, just a small handful of you, because who would expect to see table and chairs on top of a bridge? Anybody expect to see that? And what happens with our minds, most of us, there are those creatives among us, those rare perceptive people who maybe have practiced the power of perception in their life, but very easy to miss it. Why? Because we don't expect it. How many things have we missed in our life right in view because we didn't expect them? How many job offers went bye-bye because we weren't standing in the expectation of our good? How many things could we even imagine have passed us by? And we say, well, it didn't come our way. Well, perhaps it did, and we were busy looking elsewhere. We fail to see what's right in front of us more often than not. This is a human thing. This is not some problem. This is the way the brain works, and we're talking about this for a reason. All right, there's another challenge, and that is recognizing that my perception's not the only perception. Imagine that. That just because it's my truth doesn't make it truth. Imagine that, right? So here's a picture for you. All right, now who's sitting and who's standing? How many say the woman is standing and wrapping her arms around the man who is on the chair? Put your hands up if that's what you see. All right, put them down. How many of you see just the opposite? And some of you aren't seeing anything. You're just like, I don't get it. I don't get it. What's happening? All right, so if you look at the man and you imagine him with a purple shirt, you see it looks like the man is standing. But now, if you look at the woman and imagine her with the black shirt, she's sitting. Now switch them up. The woman, see the man, his head is, her shoulders wrapped around his neck, and he's sitting with the white shorts, and she's standing behind him. Perception. And you will, now you can't unsee what you just saw, right? Now I see man hands too. But shh. Yes, because if you keep looking, you start to sort it out, right? But it can be very perplexing. But not only that, is if all you could see is the woman standing with her arms around him and he's sitting, you would defend that for the rest of the day. And anybody who told you different, you'd say, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And vice versa. But now you know better. Now you know that perception is tricky, is it not? And so all of this to just say that our human brains work the way they do, and there's lots of reasons for that, which I don't have time to go into, nor do I have the expertise to tell you the truth about that. But we must be able to at least acknowledge that our human biology and our brain chemistry and the apparatus with which we perceive the world around us is not the only tool that we have. That we have spiritual eyes. We have a faith faculty, the power of perception, which is our ability to see what isn't evident through human seeing alone. And that means that we have the capacity to look deeper into any situation. And the first situation that I like to look deeper into is the one in which I feel irritated. That's a really good starting place to sharpen my power of perception. Because if I'm feeling irritated, it's very clear to me that I don't see the whole picture. That I would be much more likely to feel compassion, to feel even the question, to be willing to listen, to be willing to understand, if I were open-heartedly in the stance of a broader perception, my capacity of faith. And that this is the starting place of faith, because where it's going to lead us in the next few weeks, we'll talk more about them, is we go from perception, shifting our perception. In other words, understanding there's something more real than what I'm looking at. There's something more true than what I'm perceiving in this moment. I'm going to look for that. I'm going to do that. And then the next aspect of faith is conviction. And that's knowing what I know and knowing what I don't know, and being willing to stand in the absolute assurance of good. And then the third aspect, which we're going to be looking at 2 weeks from the next 2 Sundays, is our power of expectancy, because faith without action isn't really faith. The perceiving power linked with the ability to shape substance. In other words, we have to do something with that perception in order to set in motion our faith. So are you going to go with me on that journey in these next couple of weeks? And some of the practices that we can do to sharpen our power of perception, the perceiving power of faith, is we have some practices. We can cultivate our mind activation of faith. And we could do that by reframing the meaning that we have assigned to the interactions that we have in our day. By just asking ourselves, do I feel the least bit irritated? If I do, it's a pretty good sign that I need a perception shakeup, right? I could shift my perception. Let me pay attention to that, and let me utilize my mind for the discipline of intentionally looking at what I look at and starting to see it differently. That's a beautiful exercise. A body activation for this, or a way to get physically involved in this, is to go to places where you can observe. I remember being a young girl, and I loved sitting on the boardwalk in Atlantic City because all the most interesting people walked by. You can do that here. You can go to the beach and watch, or you can you can go to the river walk and find a seat on a bench and have a great time just as well. Observing, what do you see? What do you see? And working with your own mind when you see through a filter of judgmentalness, and instead come back to looking with bright eyes, with just a fresh willingness to see what is rather than what you've made it to be. Beautiful, beautiful exercise. And it gets you outside too, which is a really good thing, right? And then, of course, the spirit activation of this power of perception is to tell yourself the great power of your own mind, to be able to perceive spiritually, to see as God sees, is one way you might say that, right? So we're going to meditate for a moment now on our faith center. And I'm going to ask you to get your body involved in just the gentlest way. So if you sit on the edge of your seat, or a little toward the edge of your seat, and place your elbows on your knees and drop your forehead into your open palms. Because our faith faculty is deep in the brain, in the center of the brain. And so by touching the forehead in some way as we meditate, we are opening that third eye channel where the pineal gland is located deep in the brain, and stimulating that as we meditate. Now, I will say this, if you tire in this position, I don't want you distracted from your prayer time, and in that case, do sit up again. But if you can, sit in this and find a restful way to meditate in this posture, this will be very good for activating your power of faith. The pineal gland is located midpoint between the right and the left hemisphere of your brain, deep in the center. I want you to take yourself there in your imagination and shine the light of royal blue throughout your brain, sort of like washing your brain with the color blue. And what we're doing in that activity is just clearing the brain of its fog, of foggy mentality, of stinking thinking, and washing the brain with the perceiving power of faith. If we agree that we are one with the One, that there's no separation, there's only God, and that right where I am, God is, if I agree to that, then there's no distinction in this moment between that power that is faith and what I am. So I now claim the power of faith. And I tell myself this great truth, affirming, by the light of faith, I see with divine eyes. I see beyond the report of my senses. I dare myself to find the good within the disturbing, the truth within all that seems false. By my power of faith, I perceive possibilities. So now, anchored in faith, just breathe restfully for a moment. By the light of faith, I see with divine eyes. I see beyond the report of my senses. I dare myself to find the good within the disturbing, the truth within all that appears false. By my power of faith, I perceive possibilities. And now, sitting erect again, I just bless my power of faith, and I shine the light of that blue power out beyond me. I let this room be filled with that essence of faith. And I agree to exercise my power of perception. For I am the power of faith. And so it is. And so it is. A few additional practices, and these are things that I really heartfeltly recommend, especially in these next couple of weeks. And these are integrations. These are body, mind, spirit ways to exercise our power of perception. Number one, slow down. Okay, I'm talking to myself. Amy Herman, who teaches the art of perception, an amazing woman, she says slowing down doesn't mean being slow. What it means is just taking a minute to absorb what you're observing. To be, when we hear the be here now, be present to what is, that's the mentality. To be able to recognize the nuances, to be able to see what isn't obvious in a situation, to be able to absorb and interpret in a greater way. And then the other thing, and here's a toughie for us in our plugged-in kind of world today, is limit your input. It's not a bad idea to limit your input. If you're a news junkie, just make some space around that, you know? Set some boundaries. Don't watch the news before you fall asleep at night, for example. You know, don't scare yourself. You know, don't watch and then feel all the energy stirred up of that, you know? I'm not saying not to be tuned into what's going on in the world around you. Some people choose not to. I choose to do that. I think it's important for me to sense what's going on and to be able to make sense of it, you know? But you don't have to be plugged in all the time. And, you know, you can reduce your time on social media, you know, because everything on social media is the truth, isn't it? You know, make a practice of doing something like turning on some calming, beautiful music instead to inspire you while you're driving your car, you know, for example. Okay, and then be still and silent. I mean, this is our practice in unity is meditation, and there's a very good reason for that, to be still. Did you know that the word silent, an anagram of the word silent is listen? Listen. It's hard to listen when we're blathering, when we're making stuff up, when we're chitter-chattering in our own brains. It's hard to listen. So that silence, going into the silence, becoming still for a time. And there's all kinds of ways to do that. I like to do that floating on a floaty in my little backyard bathtub, my little pool. You know, I like to do it, you know, I like to do it sitting in the woods. Find your place and be still and silent. And then I think reflect. I think it's important to have conversation. I think it's important to write in our journals. It's important to reflect on what we're thinking about and what's going on. Rather than trying to defend our own position, it's important to ask questions. Wouldn't it be wonderful if when someone approaches you to argue a point or to tell you you're wrong, or if you're thinking somebody else is wrong, wouldn't it be wonderful instead to ask more questions? To say, I'm interested in knowing why you feel this way or why you think this way, or, you know, we might actually learn something. So those are the things. Slow down, limit the input, be still and silent, and reflect. Now, all these speak of a sort of a contemplative way of living, and that certainly is consistent with the unity way of living, isn't it? And it certainly will allow us to be far more effective when we do speak to matters that are important to us. You know, when we speak, you know, what is it when you speak, we all listen? What's the name? What is that? E.F. Hutton, right? Yeah. Yeah. So, are we willing? Are we willing to do some simple practices to change our perspective and to cultivate a faith for these times? Have a great week ahead.
This message has been brought to you by Unity Church of San Antonio to open your heart, transform your life, and celebrate your divine identity. Visit us on the web at www.unityofsa.org. And remember, you are the light of God, so shine brightly today.